John? John?
Oh, she's
We need you? Okay.
Are you giving us a red card? Do we have to leave now?
Warren Farrell is often called the father of the men's movement. It was his books that, I would not say that it made men's issues mainstream because we're still working on that, but certainly gave them a kind of legitimacy and exposure they had never previously had. His most recent book is The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. And he will be joining us as an avatar as soon as the technology decides to behave itself.
Can we ask our questions to Barbara afterwards?
Yeah, we will try to make time to do the questions. I was pledged to be ruthless, so I will be the one who's unpopular, but it is... one of the things that I think is extremely important about gatherings is that you make a commitment to your audience that we will take so much of your time and not more, that if you are told you can leave at 4, we will in fact unlock the door at 4 o'clock. And so there will be plenty, there will be time for talking. We'll try and make some time for formal questions, but we will ensure that we keep to our program, because we really appreciate that people's time is one of their scarce resources, and that you have taken an entire afternoon to be with us here today, and we are going to treat your time as valuable.
I'm assuming if there isn't time to ask Barbara a question, we can certainly bid on the 2 books that she's in the charity, correct?
You can certainly bid on the 2 books that she's in the charity. Thank you very much. I think you're going to get a free item. You're doing a great job of helping us here. I was afraid you were going to mention that the pen had stopped writing 3 days later. Quite the reverse. The pen is phenomenal, folks. And so is a great deal of the other merchandise. Are we good?
I can. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, great. David asked me to talk with you a little bit about developing programs for that will be in the service of men, and so I'm going to spend a minute. I'm going to offer about 16 different programs that I think can be helpful, but I'm going to sort of spend a minute sort of giving you the logic behind that. What I have found is that boys are having problems in all developed nations. And developed nations have in common the fact that there's the luxury, there's the ability to survive has been taken care of to a larger degree than has ever occurred in history before. And as a result, the societies give permission for 2 things that they haven't given permission for in most societies previously. One is for divorce, and the other is for women to have children without being married. And both of those are fine as permissions per se, but in both of those groups, the groups where there's large amounts of divorces and large amounts of moms having children without being married, there are 2 groups of people that happen from there. One is children that are raised by single moms that do not have significant involvement with their fathers and mothers. And the other is children that are raised that do have significant involvement with their fathers after divorce, and also when they're growing up without being married. And it's in that group where there's what I call dad-deprived boys, as opposed to dad-enriched boys, which is a very large group in both of those divorced families and in moms that have children without being married families, where the problem lies with boys. That is, boys who do not have a significant amount of father involvement, for example, have, excuse me, have problems in more than 70 different areas. Their sisters also have problems in most of those 70 areas, but the 70 areas are not as damaging for the sisters as they are for the brothers. As it turns out, whenever there is any type of emotional disruption, whether it's family disruption, boyfriend-girlfriend disruption, moving to a different location, all of those are significantly harder on boys whose emotional skills, emotional intelligence, coping skills, social intelligence is not as well developed and as refined as boys is. And so I'll just give one example and then go into some programs that I think can counter that. So just one example in pediatrics last year, there was a study showing that at the age of 9, which is the age at which the length of one's telomeres best predicts one's life expectancy. So at the age of 9, the telomeres, which are the inside of every cell, there are telomeres, and the telomeres are what holds your genes and your ability to be able to prevent diseases like cancer, heart disease, and almost all your diseases. And so the shorter your telomeres are, the shorter your life expectancy. So 14% shorter telomeres are likely to predict approximately a 14% shorter life expectancy. So at the age of 9, that's one of the crucial turning points. So there was a major study done of children who did not have versus children who had significant father involvement at the age of 9. And they found that had not had significant father involvement for many years, or conversely had significant father involvement for many years. By the age of 9, those children, the brother and sister, when you average them together, had on average 14% shorter telomeres by the age of 9. But the boys' telomeres were then again 40% shorter than the girls. And so this is just one 70 different examples of the power of the lack of what I call dad-deprived boys versus dad-deprived girls. And you can see in that example that the dad deprivation hurts both the boys and the girls, but hurts the boys at the 40% shorter, stronger level, or the more potent, more damaging level than it does their sisters. So, and obviously, when you have the same family, you have the socioeconomic factors controlled for, and many other factors that the study was prepared to show for. So, in studies of people moved to different locations that were the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the United States moved people from poorer locations to better locations with better schools, which they predicted would have a very positive impact on boys and girls. Positive impact on girls, but their brothers, it had a worse impact on. It led to depression because the boys did not know how, and alienation and withdrawal into video games and porn, because the boys did not know how to adjust nearly as well. So on the surface level, the boys seemed to be just fine, no problem, no emotions, no crying or less crying, and so on. But it was exactly that repression of emotions that was a sign of the problems of being able to readjust. So now I'm going to focus a little bit on programs that I think that could be funded effectively as people become aware about these things, and I'm going to be working a little bit, not always from programs directly related to boys, but if you look at the divorce issue, and we ask a deeper question, which is, how do we prevent divorces? And we have a choice. We could legislate against divorces, or we could teach people how to communicate so they have better marriages and fewer divorces. And my preference is to teach people how to communicate more effectively so they have better marriages and fewer divorces, because they enjoy living together, and also and that allows their children to see a model of better and more effective communication. So I'm going to do programs that are always, as I said, sometimes they're a step away from the actual boys' issues, and sometimes they're directly related to the boys' issues. But a combination, I think, of both of these, I think, might be helpful. So the first, I think, one of the biggest misunderstanding that I found in doing the research for the boy crisis was not understanding the difference between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. Almost all moms spend a certain amount of time reading parenting magazines, reading books, and talking with their mothers and women friends about parenting. And so women have a knowledge of how important protecting children is, how important being sensitive to children's needs are, and and probably biologically combined with that, that nature and nurture combined, they do a really good job at doing that. And we all know that women, way the women that I dated between the two marriages that I have, my current marriage and my former marriage, almost always the word they used most frequently was the word, aside from the phrase "I love you," was the words overwhelmed, and we know how overwhelmed women become with just often with children. And I think the involvement of fathers is something that can really reduce that overwhelm. But beyond just reducing it from a time factor, there's an enormous misunderstanding in almost all developed nations between the difference between mom-style parenting and dad-style parenting. And so dad-style parenting will typically focus more on roughhousing, focus more on boundary enforcement. Those are the two, I said roughhousing and boundary enforcement very quickly, but those are two examples of 10 significant differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. And dads are not good at doing their homework about what the value of boundary enforcement is and what the value of roughhousing is. And so dads who roughhouse, usually a mother is looking over at the dad roughhousing with the children and thinking, oh my God, I feel like I just have one more child here to monitor. And she's sort of trying to not interfere, but at the same time, she's sort of seeing that the kids are having fun, but she's predicting that sooner or later there's going to be an accident, and she's about 100% likely to be right. But the fathers don't explain what is going on, the importance of the bond that is being created as they roughhouse, the importance of that bond being able to be used for boundary enforcement, the importance of boundary enforcement being able to be used to create postponed gratification, the importance of roughhousing to developing empathy. No one would ever have predicted that roughhousing, an increase in it, produces empathy. But the dads use their ability to, the bond that they create from roughhousing, to be able to say to the kids, if you know, Jimmy, if you keep pushing Jane, your younger sister, like that, I'm going to stop roughhousing. And then dad's tendency to enforce boundaries leads to the children to know that if they do push Jane again, and they don't think of Jane's needs, not just their own needs, to win at the wrestling match that they've all set up, then they're going to lose their roughhousing. And dad's tendency to enforce the boundary of his threat to stop the roughhousing if John continues to push Jane teaches John that he has no option but to think of Jane's needs, and teaches Jane to think that she has no option to think of her brother's needs. And so the data shows that there's an enormous increase in empathy when children have dad-style parenting, and the more time children all around the world spend with their fathers, the more empathetic they're likely to be, the more they're likely to be able to distinguish between being assertive and being aggressive, and the more they're likely to, as a result of those ability to make those distinctions, the more likely they are to have friends. The more likely they are to have friends, the less likely the less likely they are to withdraw into video games. The more likely they have boundary enforcement, the more likely they are to be able to finish their homework, to rehearse for being a good rugby player or ice hockey player, and do all the drills that are necessary to become proficient at that. And therefore, the more praise they get from their teachers, their peers, and the prouder they make their parents at home. And so therefore, the less likely they are to withdraw games, and then as they get a little older, porn. So that being the background, here are some of the programs that I would suggest. Training parents on dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, the differences and the communication skills that it takes for both mom and dad to hear each other's differences, rather than interrupting each other by explaining why their style parenting is better. And so through the combination of that communication skills training, creating what I call checks and balance parenting, where you get the best of mom and the best of dad style parenting. So the child learns that, yes, it can, so dad and mom learn how to negotiate, allowing the child to climb the tree to a certain height, and to be attentive to the child's needs to be safe, but at the same time, understanding the increase in IQ that occurs and confidence that occurs when the child takes the risks to climb that tree to begin with. So that's just a few examples of that type of programs. Now those types of programs can happen in schools, through WISE, but I suggest that the beginning of this process is that we start those programs in schools, working with PTAs to create mom and dad style parenting, and so that's one. Number two is the more that we move away from needing boys to be our heroes in war, and the more we move away from needing boys to be the sole provider as a definition of masculinity, the more, if men are not earning money and they're not dying for us in war to such a great degree, women are going to want something from men other than money. And one of the things that they'll want from men other than money is emotional intelligence. And one of the ways to start that emotional intelligence quick at an early age is to, in first grade, second grade, third grade, teach boys and girls how to communicate, not just with each other, that is boys versus girls, but also boys to boys and girls to girls. And so that empathy training and sensitivity training, which has been tried for years now, to great benefit in terms of reduction of depression and reduction of homicide and suicide rather, has been really very effective. And we need, so instead of having bullies versus bullied, we need to be able to have the communication so each person understands the human being that every child in that classroom is. So because when you're far less likely to bully somebody who you have compassion for, and and once children learn how to communicate effectively, they've established the underlying framework for not having to being able to communicate with their eventual partner, and therefore not have divorces, whether they're heterosexual or gay. And so that was example. But the important caveat there is if you're training boys and girls to communicate at a very early age, you need to also simultaneously train their parents. Otherwise, you have the boy and girl going home having communication skills and having a contempt for their parents, not having the type of communication skills that they have. And then that creates a different type of disrespect between the children and their parents that undermines family stability. Another program that I would suggest is to work with psychologists on looking at, in the Boy Crisis book, I have 60 signs of depression and potential suicide, 60 red flags. And we have done a really good job of identifying the red flags that are signs of depression in girls. And girls manifest their signs of depression much more thoroughly, effectively. In college, for example, the counselors in college are used 75% by females, 25% by males, but 75% of the suicides in college are by males, not females. So you can get a sense of the importance of the helping professions knowing how to identify the red flags of depression that could potentially become the suicide also, or in male style. So suicides are sometimes not just suicide, but they happen with school shootings or mass shootings or joining ISIS or whatever. Boys who hurt us as well as hurting themselves. They commit both suicide and homicide to a greater degree. Working with a third program is to work with educators and parents on what I call the 18 ways that I discuss in the Boy Crisis of combining heroic intelligence with health intelligence. And so for those of you who have read the Boy Crisis, you know that I distinguish between heroic intelligence, which is training for a short life, versus health intelligence, which is training for a long life. And one of the things I discuss is how parents and society have given boys very mixed messages. We tell them to be safe as we send them out to play football. We tell them to come home safe as we send them into the military. And those are and we feel proud of them when they serve in the military and are train themselves to be disposable. But we also hope that they manage to not be disposable. And so we have to be much more conscious of what these mixed messages are, the mixed messages between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. And I would say that training boys to be effective as heroes was very good training for life in the past, but training boys to be successful in a different way, in a way that combines the best of heroic intelligence and the best of health intelligence, is training our boys to be successful in the future. I think we need to educate a fourth program. We need to educate educators on four things. One is the purpose void. why boys had purpose in the past, but have much less purpose in the future and at present, what that purpose void is, and the danger of connecting that purpose void when compounding that purpose void with a dad void. So when boys have a purpose void, they have more needs for dads to give them a sense of purpose to fill that void. Otherwise, they tend to take their testosterone and channel that sense of purpose in a very negative way rather than in a positive way. Third, we need to make every parent aware of this difference between heroic intelligence versus health intelligence. And fourth, we need to be aware of why boundary enforcement is such a good antidote to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what are the other 30 or 40 non-prescription treatments ADHD children can receive before we prescribe drugs to them. Or if we do prescribe drugs to them, having these other treatments and approaches be a bridge to getting rid of the drugs rather than becoming drug dependent. Next, I think doing cooperative programs with the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Ys, the Mankind Project. These cooperative programs, I think these institutions are already available. They have a very good history of developing the best of masculinity rather than the worst of masculinity, and that is, I think, would working with these groups, I think, would be very helpful. Mentor programs. Everyone knows that mentors are really good for boys, and we need to work with single moms in particular who to first of all understand the importance of dad, so that rather than bad-mouthing dad, she does everything possible to identify the contributions that dads tend to make and try to bring dad back into the family again where possible. Sometimes it will not be possible. Where it's not possible, we need to work with single moms on mentor programs. So every boy has a mentor, that boys get involved in the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Mankind Project, and so on. But more importantly, that what is less frequently understood is that boys not only need to have mentors, they need to be at as young an age as possible, they need to be mentors. Boys' development happens at a quicker pace when they are looking at themselves through the people that they can help and be mentors to. So rather than do something destructive, they start saying to themselves, if I do that, how will I represent that to the boy or girl that I'm mentoring, usually the boy that I'm mentoring, and how will that look to them? And I'll be a disgrace to them, and therefore they tend to mentor themselves more effectively when they have responsibility for somebody else and have that sense of purpose in their life. We need to, for intact families, we need to work with intact families on how to structure family dinner nights. Family dinner nights are one of the greatest predictors of a child's success, but family dinner nights can become family dinner nightmares. And I found that to be so frequent, I ended up creating a whole appendix in the book on how to construct the family dinner nights so that they would end up becoming constructive rather than destructive. I'm getting the time sign, so I'll allow you to take a look through the Boy Crisis and develop and work with other programs, whether it's instead of working with STEM professions, developing caring professions, instead of working with flag football, developing tackle football only, developing flag football programs in the school systems, sending out the messages to train fathers to be what I call father heroes. And so I will let it go there because the time is up, and thank you for your time. Yes, I've been working every week for the last 9 to 10 years now to try to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, and we almost did it with the Obama administration, but Valerie Jarrett knocked us down, saying that we have too much boys and men already, and we shouldn't take away from girls and women. So she was looking at boys, men, and women and girls as zero-sum games, and from my perspective. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. and we need to all work together because we're all in the same family boat. So we didn't quite get it through with the Obama administration, and now with the Trump administration, we're having some receptivity in the Department of Education, but we have not moved up the ladder yet to get the attention of the very upper echelons of the U.S. government at this point. So every week we are meeting to work on ways of making this happen, and but we're still working on it. And so part of my reason for devoting 11 years to the boy crisis is that I felt that one of the things that every politician says is I can't move unless the country at least is part of the way there, because otherwise I lose my ability to be reelected. And so part of what I need to get out, what I felt the boy crisis would do, is to get out into the society the need for boys, how the challenge boys are facing, and what the constructive solutions are, which ones can be done by individuals, which ones by groups, which ones with government help, and how the government can help stopping the subsidy of families in which fathers are absent. And so all of those issues need to be worked on. But first, the need for that to happen, and the need for the crisis to be on the conscious level needs to occur before politicians are willing to move and risk their careers to support that. As you know, in Canada, Senator Ann Cools did a very good report about 15 or so, maybe 20 years ago, on what was happening with boys that really has not been heeded to the degree that it needs to be. Thank you. It's a real